Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the MSP Cyber Roundtable. Um, our Fort Mesa Zach is enjoying a long Easter and well-deserved holiday, and I've pulled uh, Danny Sweat, our mystery figure here from our engineering team. He's our senior engineer, actually, on the platform, in today. And since we're in geeky we're in geeky CIS safeguards and CIS baselines today. That's a great fit. Guys, how's your week been? Is anyone coloring eggs? Is like my kids are like too old for
I
that
haven't done that in
now.
a long time.
We were talking about making a lamb cake this week, me and my wife. So we'll see photos of that next week if we do it.
Well, wait, is that a
What's a
that's a
lamb
dinner, not a
cake?
dessert, right? That's I
Henry,
have
you
no
don't know.
idea.
This isn't just a normal thing. So
I I don't
big,
know. What is it?
maybe
It's
it's my
not made
big
of. You're a
time.
vegan.
Okay, I wasn't always a vegetarian. Okay, I've been around
I
the
mean,
block.
maybe this is just the Indiana Catholic family coming up, but every year we would have a cake in the shape of a lamb. It's an actual mold you bake the cake in, so it's a lamb cake.
Oh, so it's frosted and everything. It's a normal cake.
Frosted. It's a
Okay.
normal cake shaped like a lamb. It is not a meat filled cake.
How does that
Uh,
pertain to the Easter Bunny?
uh,
Religion
what does the
more than the
Easter Bunny
money.
have to
I'm
do
just
with
joking.
Easter? All right, guys. Well, so we have our guests here. I just introduced Danny from our engineering team. But we've got our friends here from Senteon. Can we just do a round of intros? And Danny, I'm going to come back to you in a minute. But Zach, why don't you start us out?
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders here with Henry, as you'll learn, of Senteon. Effectively, Senteon is a solution to harden workstations, servers, and browsers to the CIS standard. So that's when I heard Matt was going to be talking about CIS. I was like, oh, dude, I'd be happy to hop on, kind of share our experience of working hand in hand with CIS, being a company who sponsors them, because all of our solution is literally built off of what they say is correct, right? So very excited to talk about that today. But about me, I am a California guy, living there right now, originally Indiana, Purdue grad, and honestly responsible for really the external customer facing, marketing, educational material, onboarding. And then Henry here basically takes care of everything I can't.
Yeah,
But
I
Henry,
appreciate
go for it.
you introducing for me. I don't think I have anything else to add.
Oh, no, no, no. Okay, wait. What do you actually do?
Yeah, nice to meet you guys. My name is Henry. I'm also co-founder of Senteon. Recently, I'm a web dev, apparently. But I handle pretty much most of the front-end development work, help Zach with a little bit of marketing stuff and operations-related tasks. Unlike Zach, I'm a Jersey boy. So we got both sides of the country covered here. Um, what else was I supposed to say?
I mean, recently, like you said, recent web dev, Matt, I mean, to announce to all of the live audience, today is the first day our website has gone live. We just revamped it, and that's been Henry's last 30
Wait,
days,
I'm
You
pretty
night and
sure.
day.
Wait,
said that wrong. I
I know
think
you
you
had
need
a
to say,
website
yeah,
before now.
the revamp was put up
Revamp.
today.
Hopefully,
Okay.
no one will ever come into a meeting and say, I don't know what you do from your website, because we put a lot of time and effort to make sure when you visit, you know right away.
Well,
I,
I'm
I
really tempted to get distracted here now, but I'm gonna try to.
I know the guys that
I'll
have
look at
done
your
this
website later.
will understand it too. If I'm really tired today, it's because we did the domain transfer last night. And if you've done it before, you know why.
Um. So, before we'll get in more about Senteon later. Danny, you've been with us from the beginning. Do you want to just give people an idea of what's your world like?
I used to do IT for a couple of companies, and then they started moving into the getting their compliance and certifications so they could get their DoD contracts. So we went really heavy into the different things. I don't think CIS was a thing back then,
See,
but
It was Sans 20. We're gonna get into that in a minute.
but yeah, we went into a bunch of the ISOs, and yeah, after going through 3 rounds of that and figuring out what we did wrong from the auditors each time, we got that process down pretty good. And now I just moved over coding that into the system.
But in our world, you're like site reliability engineer. You're the deep technical architect. I think when people start thinking about how do we keep all of this security information safe, and how do we like import all this security data from all the different places like Senteon, right? Danny's behind the scenes there.
How do we access it quickly?
Wait, before we get into like real content for the day, I forgot that we got Zach's Easter food. Henry, what's your like either favorite Easter food or favorite food related Easter memory?
Yeah, I don't know. Do the Easter eggs count?
Yeah, well, only if they have candy in them, I
I
guess.
guess I gotta be honest. I'm not a big Easter guy, so I don't have too many memories of it, other than doing Easter egg hunts when I was a kid. And I think my parents used to use real eggs, and I think we lost a couple of those.
Oh, that's
And
gross.
they're not very nice to find 6 months later.
All right, well, that was the bad Easter
You
memory.
will know you lost them in about 4 months, especially when they're underneath the deck.
A little easier to find after 4 months, huh?
Yeah. No.
I'm not a huge Easter lover, but I definitely have those childhood memories that was in my life. Danny, do you have like a favorite Easter food or thing or memory?
No, it's always just been basically a Christmas stocking stuffer day, except for my wife turned into another Christmas.
All right. Well, today's CIS day, the first thing we're going to do is controls. So I'm just going to jump right into a control overview, guys. Give us a moment here. I'm going to queue it up. So, we're talking about the CIS controls today, and actually, they were the critical security controls. People still call them that sometimes. I think CIS these days prefers just CIS controls. So it's CIS controls now. Before this, it was CIS critical security controls. Before that, it was SANS top 20. Before that, it was post-its on someone's wall in the NSA. So backstory here, the national security industry, in another life ago, practically at this point, realized that hey, all these security standards exist for large enterprise, but the public information infrastructure, the public data sphere, was a security disaster, and the public deserved a guidebook on how they could actually defend themselves easily. And so some people from inside our US government came up with a list of, hey, these are the things that if we were trying to defend your systems, you should do. And they contributed that to SANS, and SANS maintained that list for a few years, and they were the maintainer, and they updated it a few times, but then eventually they handed the job of maintaining that over to a new organization, CIS, which was founded really with that whole mission of keeping the world safe by stopping cyber attacks. So they're a non-governmental organization, but CIS does work with governments all over the world, and they work really closely with state governments here in the United States, but I know that they work with others as well. So they maintain this CIS controls list, but they take community contributions from people all over the world, and they depend on community sponsorship and community support, and of course probably some government support as well. Um, you guys at Senteon have been working with CS for how long now? A couple years?
Uh, I first got introduced to them back probably in like 2017 in college.
Okay.
Just a little dating. But we've officially been working with them since 2022. Is that right, Zach? 2021,
Yeah,
maybe
'cause
somewhere around there.
to be a truly authorized vendor or utilize their recommendations in your tool, you do need to properly sponsor CIS, which they've been a great partner as well. And Henry talks on that lightly, introduced to it in 2017. The cool backstory to that, which I got to hear firsthand, was from Henry's and another co-founder's professor over at Purdue, who actually teaches lessons based off of these CIS controls, and really calls them out. Henry, you can obviously talk more towards that, but it's really cool to see universities. We have another partner from Penn State professor who also teaches on the CIS controls. So it's really cool just seeing how people take these and use it in their day-to-day and teaching the people that are coming up in the space?
Yeah, I know. It is worth pointing out that they are under copyright, right? They're controlled by CIS. They're provided freely to people, but there is some control over these standards, and it's really for them to just really be able to operate this community program. You know, when a government comes up with a security standard, they typically give it away into the public domain. But first of all, the government already has their funding model, right? The second thing is, I don't know if you guys have looked at some of these government standards, but they move really slowly and they're very complicated. And CIS controls from the beginning were designed to break attack chains as fast as possible and to be up to date. So they update this frequently. And I know I've heard some rumors of, and I'm not going to get into them, but we might be looking at a point release coming out soon in the 8 series. We're on 8.0 right now. Version 9 is also in the works. But in any case, we're going to see an update this year. So stay tuned on that. And before we move forward here, it was CIS 20. It's now CIS 18.
Good
So
enough to offer.
we've got, and it looks like I see there might be a typo here. Hold on a second, guys. Yeah. So it says IG1, IG1, IG1 at the top of the slide here. But if you are watching, it's IG1, 56 controls, IG2, 74 additional controls, IG3 has the most expensive, 23 controls. CIS has arranged their control framework, and they're pretty unique in doing these two things I'm about to tell you. One is they have a low, medium, high. So if you're a small business, you don't have regulated data, uh, we've got another slide we can show on this in a minute, but um, if you're a small organization, you don't have regulated data, you're probably in this. You should be in the IG1 category for best practice and safeguards. If you've got critical systems, you're a large organization with a lot of risk, you probably need to be up at the top of the spectrum. If you do implement all of the controls, IG1, IG2, and IG3 for a total of 153 safeguards, you're stopping, depending on the type of attack, you're probably in the 90-something% range of likelihood of stopping that attack. So it's really effective for relatively low cost. So that's one neat thing about CIS. The second thing, and this is what's unique about CIS, they are ordered in the order of cost effectiveness. So if you start at the top, you're putting the best money into your security program. And if you just work down that list, you are always putting money where it's going to be most effective. We're
Yeah,
going
and to take that a step further with you, Matt, I know if anyone in the audience has seen the CIS Community Defense Model, their CDM, they even align a lot of these recommendations to a MITRE attack techniques. And that was something I did a webinar with Felicia King on, and she has some great content outlining how that relationship is and really calling out how to take CIS and turn it into return on investment by prioritizing those top controls or those top mitigation techniques to ultimately reduce the risk of specific attack techniques. So really good content out there.
Which is also really how they create these controls and how they rearrange them. So you're seeing these 18 safeguards here, 1 through 18, which is what they call the control, and then they have sub controls or sub safeguards, and that's what there's 153 of. They are in the order of what's most likely to stop those attacks based on that threat data or the indicators of compromise associated with those threat patterns that have been cataloged by the MITRE attack model. And the last couple of versions, we've seen controls move up and down, and we're probably going to see this move again, if only because even if technology didn't change, which it does, attackers change their attack modes every year. We see this. I love the Verizon breach report that comes out annually because you get to see what's popular in attacker world.
Oh yeah, the DBIR is always fun.
Yeah.
Didn't they even map that to CIS in this most recent one?
They did. They did. And
yeah, I think Rich and I talked about it on our webinar series, but that was really cool to see Verizon doing that.
Yeah. So this is like showing, like, based on data similar to that Verizon data, but CIS has their own information sharing network to figure out what attacks are popular right now, and they do that investigation of using those attack catalogs to understand what would have stopped this attack, right? And they made these changes from version 7 to version 8, right? Mostly they moved the controls around in priority. I mean, they changed some language, right? But the most important thing is they're responding to what's happening out there right now, right? So that's I feel like I'm done with the CIS like high level on the controls. What do you guys want to add here before we move away from control world?
Yeah,
you want to go?
I got one thing I can add. I always like to give a shout out to what Matt Lee over at Pax8 is working on. So he did get a group of peers, myself included, to really dive deeper into each CIS control and create, I guess, workflows almost of how each CIS safeguard feed into other safeguards or feed into the other controls. So I will note again, just kind of some of this insight we've heard rumors of in version 9 when it comes out. They may even have some type of visual aspect to the controls to better assist with aligning to them. But yeah, Henry, man, take it away.
I just thought it was interesting that controlled admin privileges technically got bumped down 2 levels because they combined it with the need to know.
Yeah,
that was my one
It
thing.
did. That's
surprised
funny.
that got bumped down. Yeah.
I've never seen this graph. That's interesting.
Yeah, they moved them both because they changed how they organize them, right? But they also respond to the threats, and we just talked about that. But they also respond to what organizations are good and bad at, right? So
That's fair.
vulnerability management was number 3, right, in version 7. And guess what ended up being above vulnerability management this time around? Secure configurations, right? So that's your world, right? And so we found that vulnerability management's a little bit less important, and it's not because it's less needed, right? It's because there's less attacks that would have been stopped by that because people are doing better at automatically patching than they used to. But it's still really close to the top of that list because people are still not great at that, right?
So here's a hunch for you, Matt.
Yeah.
If you had to take a guess, we're talking about version 9. What changes do you think they're gonna make from version 8
put
to
on the
version 9?
spot.
Well, I have some insider knowledge, but let's just talk about what's changed in the world since basically the beginning of COVID, right? Well, zero trust is a thing now. People don't work in the office anymore, right?
Sure.
And identity is now the biggest attack space, right? They're not necessarily attackers used to break in through the back door because it was left wide open, right? And now people are coming in through legitimate user accounts, and so that's changing too. But how do you defend against these things? I think we're secure configurations are still going to be important, right? I think vulnerability management is still going to be important. I'm wondering if this inventory stuff is, people are. I think in the enterprise world, people are still not great at this, but I've seen in the service provider world, people are getting better at inventory. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess with the new tooling that's available now, at some point those become the same control. If you're talking about inventory of assets, both software and they say enterprise assets, which is a little odd because that should include software. Like I feel like that should have been merged in version 8.
There's some changing to the definitions around assets that are going to be happening in 9, just like there was changes in the definitions from 7 to 8. So I'm not sure the details there, but I do know
Dropping the insider knowledge.
Identity control is way more important than network control these days. I know that for sure. All right, guys, I've had enough CIS.
Call it here.
You got the wrong people in the room if that's the case.
Controls. I've had enough of the controls. It's baseline days. So CIS controls, CIS baselines, not really the same thing at all, but people confuse these issues. People sometimes don't understand the difference. Should we do a little bit of contrast, Zach? Like this is your like home turf here, right?
This very, very much is, but I'm actually curious to hear Henry's point of view on baseline and kind of setting the stage for why these are getting maybe more prioritized today and the risks that baselines actually mitigate.
Oh, I mean, I frame that question a little differently when it comes to baselines and controls. To me, baselines are a little bit of a godsend in so much as they might be the, or I think they are at this point, the only, well, if we want to call CIS a regulatory body, they're the only one releasing something that is directly mapped to an actionable process, if that makes sense. If we look at the CIS controls, for example, when we talk about control 4, which is what the benchmark should be a part of, we're talking about doing secure configuration, but then you kind of get down to like, well, what is secure configuration? Like what does that constitute, right? And so the baselines are a fantastic method for understanding exactly what constitutes secure configurations, exactly what should be defined under that control as applicable.
Should we stick the pyramid up here, Zach? Does that make
You
sense?
got a pyramid? Put the pyramid up.
We have the benchmark pyramid. So this is taking what Henry's
Yeah, there you
diving
go.
into extremely to the root of it. And what he's emphasizing here is the CIS benchmarks really are feeding in direct recommendations to assist at better meeting the greater control. And as you greater meet the control, you're greater at meeting better regulatory frameworks or other best practice like NIST
I will
and so
say
forth.
that that's a little bit of a misnomer, though. It's not necessarily, the CIS controls definitely feed into the other frameworks, but it's not like they're more generalized or more focused one way or another than the controls are. Maybe you need to fix your pyramid.
I've got some thoughts here, guys. So I've never seen this in a pyramid before, but it's not. It makes sense. So the controls are really, first of all, they're way more technical than something like SOC 2, but they're still like general, like use a tool to go collect inventory and have a person figure out what's supposed to be there is basically the essence of what the controls say, right? And then they'll make some suggestions like, oh, you could use it this thing or that thing or that thing. But the CIS benchmarks get way more specific. They're like, if you're using Windows and you want to be pretty secure, here's how many are in the baseline 1 and baseline 2, Henry? Do you know off the top of your head?
360, I think, in L1, and then probably an additional 100 in L2.
So in just the lower security level, baseline 1, which is really great security, by the way, 360 very specific exact settings, right, that should be applied on Windows. And CIS has these for all sorts of situations. Should I bring this up on the screen?
Yeah, so your question, how many are in there? And it's a great question because like Henry said, just for
the PDF is very useful figuring
this
out, Zach.
That level 1, sorry, I wanted to get to the table of contents. Should have queued this up a little bit better. But that level 1, like Henry said, 300 some settings. This PDF, just for hardening a single workstation, is almost 1,400 pages. I mean, this table of contents alone is going to be all of those hundreds of settings. So this type of stuff is very overwhelming, which is where we're getting into. If you use a Windows system, you need to do this, this, and that. It's a lot of this, this, and that. And this is only the example of their workstation recommendations. We could talk about Chrome or Edge. There's recommendations that these benchmarks provide that just give you that foundational security that honestly, in a lot of cases, have been overlooked because it is a lot of manual work if you don't have a tool or a solution like Senteon to automate it, or just have like a PowerShell wizard that can really handle this much information.
And the browser attacks are super important right now, but that's definitely something that needs a lot of attention. CIS has these guides on a number of systems, though. They cover database servers, they cover like the different hyperscaler clouds like AWS. However, I know that the AWS guide, I want to say it's less than 100 pages, and it is something that you could just read through and follow in a few days. I don't think anyone could ever read their way through, like, it was more
that
than
one alone was 1,400, but then you have another 1,200 for servers, and then the Chrome I think was like 400, right? So, it's thousands of pages.
So this best practice security guidance in the benchmarks that gets super specific on database servers and cloud is really important, and they have the best. Like CIS is basically the world authority on how to do this in a very specific way. But on Windows, it's a particularly challenging problem because there's so many things in a Windows, right? Like, So
I mean,
getting all
that's a
that
good
right is
that's a good
yeah.
point to emphasize there. There's so many things in a Windows, and it's because Windows, unlike other systems, come fully default, like fully ready to use, and you can do anything you want. And Windows as a business model forces you to kind of determine what you don't need and how to reduce your attack surface yourself. So, like you said in your Amazon example, the PDFs may be smaller and more digestible because there's less flexibility already. I don't know. I've never looked at this PDF. That's an assumption. But with Windows, there's just so much you can do and so much you can lock down. It just adds up.
We got some documents here. Do you guys want to dig in anywhere else?
What kind of documents you got?
Yeah, which ones? Are you talking about the other slides?
Yeah. Well, we've got the crosswalk thing. We've got the other
Yeah, we could
slides.
show the crosswalk one. I think that'd be really good because I think the pyramid analogy that or visual that I gave an effort towards maybe wasn't as accurate as you guys would have liked. But the big thing here, we do talk about these prescriptive one-to-one recommendations on the each different settings. And when we say settings here, obviously I showed that large PDF, but we're talking things like machine and activity timeout, networking protocols, password policy, right? Those are just examples of some of the things they recommend. And the cool things with these CIS benchmarks, a lot of them, they actually say, hey, if you do this setting, it assists with your compliance or your completion of this control. So the visual we have here, in the light blue on the top half is just all 18 controls as Matt talked about. But in the bottom half, you'll see 10 of them are actually highlighted. And those 10 alone for hardening just a workstation are better assisted at completing them by having these benchmarks in place. So if you want bang for your buck, doing these benchmarks is going to help you meet a lot of these controls or partially begin a lot of these
So
controls.
the controls are separate from the benchmarks. The benchmarks help you meet the controls, and I know from experience some of these controls, like if you put all those benchmarks in place and you harden your system, some of these controls are met at like a really high level, right?
Mhm.
And some of these controls, you just have this really powerful tool that supports the people doing the thing. It's really a people process, right? But
Mhm.
when you have a great tool, it just makes it so much easier, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
And I mean, the other thing with this too, and Henry, I'd love for you to dive into this. A lot of the time when we talk about benchmarks and they get overwhelmed by the PDF, it's a big PDF, it's a lot to do, but also I've noticed from my time working with MSPs, there's a fear to change security configurations. It's a fear that something will break. I can't change the setting. My client won't allow it, right? One of them might be do not display last username, right? So they're going to have to type in their username every single time. But there's a lot more technical networking ones that also could potentially disrupt something. But Henry, I mean, what's your experience? You've built our solution, right? You obviously work every day in these settings. Do you think a lot of these are disruptive? Are they recommended for everyone to do, or what's your take?
I'm always constantly surprised by the amount of variety we get in settings that are disruptive. Maybe is the best way to put it. So when we first started this out, which unfortunately, Matt, I have read all these PDFs multiple times. Uh, Mostly against my will at this point.
well, at least it's you and not me.
Yeah, sure. But we define sort of ideas of what we think are disruptive. We look at like there's probably like 10 or 15 settings that could pertain to RDP. Over time, we work with it for a year or two, and we round that list down to 8 settings, right? And then 5 months later, from those 7 I dropped, somebody does have an issue with them, and those are just in the L1 where there's just this sort of cloud around, I guess, these settings and how they affect it that really is dictated by how your environment is set up. So that's a pretty tough question to answer. I would say there's probably like 100 of them that I've never seen be
I,
disruptive.
I've
Um,
seen guys. I've implemented these hardened baselines, and it used to be way harder than with Senteon.
it's a fun
But
time.
yeah, so I use the pre-cooked images, which you can use. You have to change like everything you do as an IT department or a service provider to leverage those, right? You have to change how you operate systems. But I know with your agent, it's a bit of a button click. But um, the uh, the L1s, I would say they are inconvenience people. That can happen. And they need to be tested, right? And the L2s, frankly, The L2s break a lot.
Yeah, I don't typically actually recommend implementing the L2s for the most part. And I think it's actually a misnomer too when people talk about the L1s, because you think L1, you think it applies to like IG1. Most of the L1s are actually pertinent to IG2. And so they do expect that you have some sort of security background to be able to implement them, sort of go through the process of implementing them. Some of them are LG1 or IG1s, but I think the mass majority we look for, Zach, are I think.
Yeah, and it's because they've historically, as Matt said, have been hard to understand and hard to implement. Fortunately, with the niche that we've really focused on at Senteon is we're lowering that barrier so that these more L1 that are, as you can see in the slide here, like these are practical. These are the easy ones, the easy wins, right? They don't align to IG1 a lot of the time because of the technical knowledge to just make the change, the work it takes to be a security engineer and manage these GPOs. So ideally, what Senteon ultimately is doing is making these L1s so easy that you'd be silly not to consider them IG1.
Well, I consider the CIS L1s to be indicated, that is recommended for every general purpose endpoint in an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where they are disruptive, you can change behavior so that your business is not disrupted. But also, you can make exceptions, but it should be an exception. It shouldn't be, hey, let's not do L1 because it might be disruptive. L2s, as a security professional, I recommend those only for hardened systems. And I know this is how the government does this. You know, if you've got like a security kernel at the core of your network, right? Maybe a hardened database server that's controlled. It only runs one application. You got a thorough test environment. That's definitely an L2 situation, right? But it's not something you would load on a normal desktop. Do we have some questions here? Oh,
Yeah, and we actually have a
Me
comment
too.
from Itza. I'd love to
yeah,
toss
let me
that up
pull that up
and
here.
hear your guys'
Yeah.
thoughts on it.
I was going to close on that last thought too, Matt. I think if you're actually expecting to use a system with the L2s applied, I don't think you get away with a perfectly hardened baseline. I think you're guaranteed to have some exceptions just in terms of like even having the system operate. Like I think
Oh yeah,
RDP is totally inoperable in L2. So
you'll have to apply it to a test system, see what breaks, and then figure out how to, change the L2 just enough to get that system to operate, right?
yeah,
Biggest roadblocks when implementing
that's
controls.
an easy question to answer.
So this was
It's a lot to it, though.
well, look, I think we've all had experience in these spaces. I know my biggest roadblock is my job, right? And it's been my job for a long time, is to communicate security to the people that are implementing it and investing in it, right? So the CISO's job, which I've worn that hat in the past, and now I'm doing this bigger thing and supporting other people being CISOs, right? Is you have all these possible security things you can do in the world, right? Process, technology, products, like things you could buy. And then you have the business value, that things you're actually trying to achieve, and figuring out how those relate to each other is super challenging. So when I go into an organization, the biggest challenge that I've seen is getting everyone to universally understand that technology doesn't secure itself, right? You can't automate your way through security. It's this fusion of best in class tools and best in class people and processes. And you can't do one or the other. You need both. You need great people. They need to actually be doing security things on a daily basis. And they need to have tools that actually make that possible, right? So I think that there's sometimes a mentality that you can automate your way completely through security without both of those things. And that's the biggest roadblock I see.
Yeah,
What do you guys see?
uh, I'm inclined to agree. I think my answer would be slightly different, but getting at essentially the same thing you're getting at. The biggest roadblock in general is just going to be the people, regardless of the level that it's at, right? Whether it's the people you need to convince that you need tooling or you need to be able to utilize something at like the C level, or the people that are managing the tools and controls and being able to get them properly trained, or the people you're trying to implement it on, right? You're going to get that support help desk ticket or whatever it is when you're trying to improve your security or apply a control. So sort of at every level, I feel like it's always people that are the problem. If we were all AI, you could probably automate security pretty well.
If
Unfortunately,
you
we
mean
aren't quite there yet.
if all humans were replaced by AI, we could automate security. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we'll get there one day.
I don't. I'm not wishing for that.
You also can't disagree with it.
True.
I-
For the I was gonna say, yeah, for the other half of the question though, security compliance stance, that's a topic I can talk about forever, and Zach knows that. In my opinion, they're not the same thing, and it's difficult to get compliance aligned with security, which I think should be the end goal there, but it's not necessarily always the reality.
Well, it's asked the follow-up question, and I'm going to take a swipe at that one. And I think you can use CIS controls for this. You could use CIS, the benchmarks, the actual individual baseline requirements. You could use either of these things to gap analysis your way through where an organization is. What security do they have? What should they have, or what do they need? And related to either industry standards like CIS, but there's lots of other standards out there, or laws, or just like the guy across the street. And the guy across the street either that got attacked, in which you say don't be that guy, or the guy across the street that didn't get attacked because his security is great. Like that's how people like to relate. And I think to have that level of conversation, you need to investigate through and say, here's where you're at now. Here's where you could be. And that's the way to align that stuff. And I'm making that sound really easy, right? And I've got a lot of opinionated, and our software supports this process, and your software supports this process, right? But that's the essence of it, right? Get people to be informed.
I do want to hear your opinion on this actually, because I think from what you were talking about too, something that used to be a really strong buy-in strategy, and maybe still is, depending on your thoughts on it, was a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt, right? Talking about the guy across the street that got breached, whether you want to be him or not. I think personally, I found that over time that started to change a little bit. And these days, I feel like it's more of an ROI question than it is anything else. Is that something you agree with, or do you feel like the FUD is still top of the
Uh,
food chain there?
FUD's still out there. My personal experience, and I think most experienced security professionals these days have already noticed this, so I'm not the only one who thinks this thing. FUD is how security was sold for almost 20 years straight.
Yeah,
And it's ingrained into a lot of big security brands out there. However, it no longer works. And the reason why is just animal psychology. The fact is, humans are evolved to like freak out and respond, but then to forget, right? Like if you're being stalked by a tiger, you freak out, you run, you like climb up the tree, and then if the tiger lays down in the grass and just like is chilling out because it's the middle of the day, you come down out of the tree and you keep eating, right? And you forget you were scared of that tiger until the next time the tiger like growls at you. And so the reality is people are already freaked out. They've already been freaked out about security, right? And they were freaked out because they looked at the newspaper, or they were freaked out because their actual company got breached, but they don't stay freaked out, right? And
the fatigue.
you can no longer drive buying decisions because people have been fatigued by that. So, but that doesn't mean you can't inform them about what's real, right? You can have the rational conversation, say, here's where you are, here's where you might want to be. Next time you're scared, run that direction. Don't run that direction.
I do love that analogy because it feels really apt. We're talking about that, right? It's like the tiger's growled enough times that you kind of start to ignore it. But maybe you do need to be reminded that it still jump you.
Yeah, I think people know that it can jump them at any time. They know that they can walk outside during a rainstorm and get struck by lightning, and hopefully they stop doing that. But the reality is, in the security world as professionals, we just have to inform people, hey, I'm not making you afraid. You're already rightfully afraid. Here's the information you need to, when you are afraid, get safe, right? And then you don't have to make them afraid because that tiger is going to stand up, right? Like they are going to get attacked. They are going to like fall down on a security due diligence. Like the security thing's going to happen in every organization. And when it does, those of us in the security world hopefully have already informed our end clients, this is what you need, right? and then people come to you. And I think that's the winning model in security sales right now, for everything.
I feel like these days everyone knows everyone's hacked. It's just do you make the headline news or not?
Yeah, I mean, I heard this week people thought the bridge was hacked, and I was like,
Oh yeah.
not everything's a hack.
It's a good blanket term, and it really
Got
covers
hacked
it
by a
all.
boat.
Are we done with these sheets here?
Yeah, these slides are good. I mean, one other thing to add, trying to get the buy-in strategy. So one thing that I do over at Senteon, right? No one really wants to change these settings. No one necessarily knows the types of risks that it mitigates, right? It's not just general knowledge, right? But what we've been doing and have offered, and some of our partners have finally taken us up on it, is we'll present to their end clients to kind of educate on this. And going back to the question, like what's been really effective is showing their real data. So in the instances where I present to the MSP's client, I say, hey, can you toss Senteon on a few of their machines? And I'll show the client during the presentation their real data, not just a hypothetical demo, not just a hypothetical, simulated attack. Like this is the risk it mitigates. It's showing, hey, this is not hypothetical. We found the setting store passwords with reversible encryptions, right? That's a real example. And it's like, hey, did you know this is set here? Do you know why? And the answer is no. They never know why, right? It was the guy who made the guy who made the golden image 20 years ago and doesn't work there anymore. The engineer who tested an application and a GPO changed, but they didn't notice. They didn't change it back, right? So going to the question again, it's showing the relatable stuff that they can actually see and already going on in their business. It has been really effective when I do those end client presentations.
Yeah, and organizations that have been around a long time, sometimes it's not even a thing someone did. It's just like they came from an earlier version
Legacy
of
stuff.
Active Directory, and
Yeah.
that settings just migrated along. Yeah, for that old technology that's totally insecure now.
Yeah.
I've seen that plenty. Although, and the other thing that's going on here, guys, is like Active Directory is sort of like evaporating before our eyes, right? I mean,
Well, we've been saying that for a decade too, though.
well, I'm seeing it, particularly in the service provider
Slowly,
space.
it's getting
Yeah.
there. It's getting there. We're finally killing it.
I'm increasingly running into service providers that say to me, "We're 100% in Azure AD. We have no more on-site Active Directory controllers. We have no more virtualized Active Directory controllers." That's increasingly common, and so, I mean, there's some great things about that, but actually, Active Directory had some great handles and knobs in there that if you just move over to the equivalent small business tooling in Azure AD, you actually don't have all the switches.
Doesn't quite cut it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so tools like yours, it used to be you could, if you really wanted to create nuanced GPOs, you could do that, right? You could have hundreds of them or whatever, complicated profiles. Actually, those settings are going away now, unless you're using really sophisticated deployments. So, I think tools like this that just have pre-configured secure buttons are more important than they ever were.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing just to share, what I'm actually hearing from the MSP space, which is exactly that. They're not using Active Directory the way they used to do that. And even for our solution, talking specifically about that, MSPs will ask me, hey, can I manage everything like I can in Intune, or can I manage everything in like I do in Active Directory? And the answer is no, right? We are not an MDM solution. We are managing the security configurations, right? So you no longer have to use those tools, the MDMs, the domain level. You don't have to manage those for the secure configurations. You manage those for whether it's application deployment or whatever use cases you have, because those are built to do that, not necessarily manage the security of security settings. So very much agree with the trend you're seeing. And if we wanted to go to the other topic that we haven't touched on too much, but the whole browser security you hinted at the beginning of the show.
Do we have a figure for this? I would love to talk about which document am I looking at here, Zach?
You gotta have a doc for it, Zach, right?
You could definitely have a doc for it, but while you pull it up, just to kind of set the stage, something that has been highly asked for since we really started hardening the workstations and servers was, hey, Senteon, the browser is becoming this container for all my SaaS apps. What can you do to help me secure the settings on my browser? And a lot of the times the MSP will ask me like, can you make it so they can't save their password anymore? And it's like, yeah, that is one of about 100 settings that you can never, one of about 100 settings that CIS recommends, right? So the trend and just what we're talking about here with Active Directory and just handling GPOs is MSPs will try to do like the top 5 most important, the top 10 most important, because it's just so hard to do. And the whole mission of Senteon is to make this much easier. Henry, am I rambling here? I see you laughing.
No,
What do you got?
I can never get over your Fred Flintstone like UI on this page.
Oh, you don't like my font. But
It's the Comic Sans or whatever.
Yeah, but that's the thing. MSPs very much want to start shifting left. We always say proactive and reactive, but what I'm really seeing with this setting management is preventative, almost like a step before proactive. Like it's proactive to do this, but these are preventative security measures by hardening these settings. So just based off of what we've heard in the market is browser hardening was the next thing on the roadmap for us to launch.
Let me ask you a little bit about this, because I know that most MSPs have some type of RMM and MDM deployed, and a lot of them have browser configuration settings. But having been out in the field trying to do this, I know that you could do a managed browser, but there's not a lot unless you have some advanced tooling that stops the user from just opening another unmanaged profile or unmanaged browser. So how does having an agent contain that surface risk?
Well, it gives us the ability to harden browsers even if they're not the primary managed browser, which I think is a good element of that.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, because
Yeah.
users will just, if they don't like the setting, just work around it, right? Or if they don't even realize they're not in the right profile, right?
Yeah, sometimes they won't know. Fortunately, Explorer is finally dead. But like if they're using Edge or things like that, there are settings and controls for those that are probably useful to just have enabled just in case. But it is also just one puzzle piece in this entire sort of that's a shitty analogy. Just one puzzle piece in that puzzle for all the things you're supposed to put together for browser security, for workstation hardening. And so I think it's just good to follow that analogy and try to put as many pieces together. This just being one of the ones that may help sort of keep people on that managed browser, or at least control them if they're not.
Yeah, and I do know that the tools that are distributed by Google and Microsoft are not they're not great out of the box for this kind of stuff.
You can use some work.
We usually hold like the deep how does like the product conversation, because we've been talking like just generally about this stuff for the end, but Eats is back again. She just like she queued you guys right up here. Do you want to all right, you do the pitch, guys.
Product pitch?
Just do
No,
it.
you're perfect. I appreciate you letting us go a little out of the agnostic educational format to address the question. Itza, we owe you a Amazon gift card or something. But now, so what makes Senteon really unique, and we hinted at this earlier in the show, is applying this as a template. Changing 1,000 settings at once can break stuff, right? You don't know what's going to break. You don't know what was set there before you applied that template. So it's just too overwhelming. So realistically, the process of how Senteon works is it has an incorporated learning mode so that we can better determine what settings have been touched before Senteon was installed. What type of context can we gather from that learning mode to better provide context if changing a setting will or will not break something. So that's really the first largest piece of that process. After that, we just present those findings, influence and assist you in the decision making of what you can handle, and of course, document any accepted risk, because the CIS benchmarks are not for everyone. But at the end of that tutorial or that walkthrough is just a simple button, and that button will change as many settings as you want. Anything you want to add to that, Henry?
Yes, it is an agent.
Oh, was that another question that's out
Yeah.
there?
It's always a question.
It's a
always-
lightweight agent, right? We got to address that. 60 megs is the highest spike we've ever seen.
Yeah, and I know that people have agent fatigue in the world, and I think that with good reason, because there's some agents out there that are like heavy, right? And they can be difficult to manage, but you know, we are no longer in we're no longer in consolidated network world, guys. Our workstations are floating all over the planet. The reality is, if you don't have agents phoning home to your cloud, right? How else is that connection going to happen in a reliable way?
So I actually heard that agent fatigue came from I should be naming names here. It came from an EDR solution that should not be named that was taking up like 50% memory usage with their agent back in the good old days. And that was
Yeah,
sort of the origin of agent fatigue.
I know. There's a lot of EDR agents. There's not just one vendor, guys. Come on, like they are
Oh,
heavy.
I heard about one specifically.
So some of them are worse than others. And MDR agents because maybe some of them have some like cruft in there that's maybe not so nice, but B, they have to like monitor all the disk access, right? And monitor what's in memory, and like our vulnerability agent and your configuration settings agent, yeah, there's a lot of value there, but like those settings don't need to be monitored exactly in real time. The reality is, how frequently are you looking at that stuff? Like once a day is probably super valuable, right? And I don't know how frequently you're actually scanning the machine, but it's probably not like churning like an engine all day, right?
At least not.
It's customizable too.
Yeah, and I know our vulnerability agent is like you scan once a day and like you get like all this great data, and there's a lot of security agents that are lightweight like that do important things, and the number of agents should not really be the way you're looking at impact, right? It's
Yeah.
how they function.
Yeah, and you mentioned one thing, how often do you want to look at that drift? And it is customizable on our platform, but I don't want to downplay the importance of knowing when a configuration drifts or having a solution. It can be any solution, right? Obviously, this is mostly agnostic webinar, right? Having a solution that can detect when a configuration changes and change it back in real time, that can truly thwart a bad actor who's in the process of trying to compromise a system, right? They access through that data point and then it's automatically closed right after. I mean, and think of that, if you can ingest that type of alerting and logs into your SIM or SOAR solution, like these configurations can be such a larger piece of that puzzle than I think a lot of people really realize, honestly.
Although most attackers are lazy, guys, let's just be honest. Like if
Well,
they run into that wall, they're like, "Oh, my automated script doesn't work." Like that's usually the end of the line.
ideally, but I mean that's also sort of what makes it effective, right? It
Yeah.
is getting rid of a lot of that low hanging fruit, and typically people are going to try the low hanging fruit first.
Someone needs to you guys just need to call Ita.
We'll get Issa on
Issa
a
online.
meeting. But I want to address a little bit of the point Henry was going into, or actually I think it was Matt, someone saying, if the script doesn't work, that's about as much as they try. And there are one of our more mature partners, he works primarily servicing banks security, right? And part of his requirements for his own audit that he goes to was security configuration management. And he went through these CIS benchmarks and he manually, over I think it was an 11-month time period, he told us, he got to about 200 or 250 of these CIS benchmarks remediated at the domain level, right? So when Senteon came in, we were able to complete that greater half to 400, 450. But the interesting part was once he remediated it with Senteon, some of the settings he thought he already hardened ended up proving not to be successfully implemented on the end client's machines or the end users. Since this
is that because it didn't deploy, or because someone changed it back, or a software
Just
changed
Active
it back?
Directory is a
this
questionable
Active
product.
Directory wasn't working, and he realized, and this also called out how rare his offsite bank employees, or the end client's offsite bank employees don't connect to the domain, right? So
Yeah.
how are you going to manage the settings if they aren't VPNing in, right? So it's just, we talk about agents, we have these conversations, but how are you actually making sure the machine is staying in the state that you think it is if you don't have that real-time access no matter what?
Danny,
Yeah.
I'll bet you've never seen a GPO not deploy, right?
I ran all the time. I'd have to re-push it.
Yeah, over and over.
Yeah. Henry, I don't know if you want to address Itza's fourth question there. I don't know if there's more to it.
Agent is compatible with, well, I actually don't know if you can run a Windows machine on GCP because we only support Windows operating systems at the moment and browsers on Windows. But regardless of where the workstation is deployed, because it is agnostic in that sense, it works fine no matter where the workstation is, whether it's Azure.
But the benchmarks for securing a cloud are like a different thing
Yes.
from the benchmarks to secure an operating system running in a cloud, right?
They are. There's a slight gap too in the benchmarks here. Not to call our buddies out over there, but the recommendations or some of the policy recommendations do differ slightly if they are on an Azure box versus a standalone one.
It's a different world, right? Like there are actually some. It's not real metal, first of all, right? It's virtual shared machines. Yeah. All right, guys. We went deep in. I've never gone this deep into a benchmarks conversation.
There's a lot to it, man. Not like we said all throughout this webinar. No one really talks about these CIS benchmarks. It is all about the controls, which isn't a bad thing. But knowing all of CIS's resources is just so critical, and this is a massive one. And it's easy wins, right? You don't necessarily need a tool or to invest into a solution to do a lot of this. Of course, automation is better and by Senteon, but you can leverage this and not even spend any money. It just takes the time.
Should we do a round of takeaways, guys, or last notes here?
I feel like that was my takeaway there.
That's cheating, man. All right, I'm putting Henry on the spot. You go first, since Zach just went.
I actually learned a lot about the CIS controls today. I appreciate that and sort of the history of it, because I think this is a bit of a corny thing to say, but it is helpful to know the history of things to understand where it's going and why. And I think a little insider knowledge helps with that too when it comes to V9. Not that I got any here, of course. But I would say probably my main takeaways was learning a little bit more about the controls and how those were structured and how 7 turned into 8 and what the changes were there.
Yeah, there's a whole deep history there. We could do a whole episode for anyone that cared. But I learned some of the things you were talking about the disruptiveness of some of these controls and how you work through them and the strategies around monitoring and responding to those exceptions. I've not personally had to be the implementer there before, so I really appreciated hearing about that. So that's my takeaway today. Danny, you're up. Did you learn anything today, or is there anything you thought you knew and turned out you were wrong?
No, I didn't know that CIS had benchmarks.
Oh, yeah, they get a whole
other than
world.
controls.
So
but
it's worth.
Kind of left that world since CIS came around.
I want to point out here one more thing about the benchmarks. Then the CIS controls are free to download. The benchmarks are not. You guys have to pay membership dues.
No, you can download. They're all free.
Benchmarks, yeah.
Yep, you just can't commercialize it like Senteon does, unless you sponsor. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They have a couple formats for them. I believe only the PDFs are free to download. And yeah.
So it used to be they were only in the workbench and you couldn't get in there without a subscription.
Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about. Oh, okay.
I've had the PDF since like 2017.
All right. I was
talking out of pocket. That's a live webinar for you.
But there's a whole bunch of benchmarks, and it's cloud, operating system, mobile devices, databases. Like they cover a lot of common risk areas, and they're really great resources. But they're not exactly implementation guides, right? Like you need to build a whole solution to even be able to use them, right?
Allegedly.
Love to read a couple thousand pages.
Yeah. Zachary, you gotta do one more thing, but it could be Easter related if you want.
I mean, everyone needs to, if you don't know what a lamb cake is, please toss a Google search. I swear my family's probably not the only ones who do this, but now, I mean, just to emphasize on my last takeaway, like a lot of this can be done if you don't have the budget to get an automated solution, right? At least look at these benchmarks and take care of some of these easier wins, right? So again, just do what you can. Foundational security is important, and EDR is not a fix-all single bullet.
All right, guys, we're gonna wrap. As we do that, I just want to tell everyone we will be back next week, and our friends over at 9Minds will be joining us to talk about using generative AI in the service provider. We're also going to go over NIST CSF at a high level. As always, like, share, subscribe, and if you want to go find our video library, we are available out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, we're streaming live to LinkedIn. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later.